The wind howled across the open fields, bending the rows of corn until they looked like waves in a restless sea. Rain pounded the tin roof of the old barn, each drop echoing through the night like a drumbeat. Thomas Walker tightened his coat around his shoulders, muttering under his breath about another sleepless night and another crop he feared might drown before harvest. He was halfway to shutting the barn door when he froze. There, just beyond the fence line, a shadow moved. At first Thomas thought it was an animal strayed too close. But then, as lightning split the sky, he saw him clearly. A man. Alone. Stumbling through the mud like a soldier returning from a long, brutal war. His suit, once expensive, was torn and ruined, the tie hanging loose around his neck. His face was pale, eyes dark with exhaustion, lips trembling as if each breath cost him. Thomas's instinct was to pull the barn door shut. Strangers didn't just show up on farmland after dark. Not here. Not in this storm. But something about the way the man staggered, not dangerous, but broken, made Thomas pause. The stranger collapsed against the fence post, clutching his chest, water pouring off him like he'd been walking through the storm for miles. His voice cracked when he tried to speak. "Please. I don't want trouble. I just need somewhere to rest. Just for tonight." The rain blurred Thomas's vision, but not enough to hide the desperation in the man's eyes. It wasn't the look of someone lying. It was the look of someone who had nothing left to give. Thomas gripped the barn door harder, his mind racing. Let him in, and he risked everything. Turn him away, and he risked something far worse. And in that split-second choice, to open the door instead of closing it, Thomas's life was about to be rewritten in ways he couldn't yet imagine. If this moment already moved you, stay with us, because what happens next will make you believe in second chances. Thomas Walker's life had been carved out of the land, and it showed on his face. Deep lines from years under the sun, rough hands that knew both the weight of harvest and the sting of failure. His farm, once thriving, now stood on the edge of collapse. Drought one year, floods the next, and mounting debts that the bank didn't care about. Every morning, Thomas rose before the sun, feeding chickens and tending to fields with tools older than some of his neighbors. Every night, he returned to a house too quiet, too empty. His wife had passed 5 winters ago, and his only son had moved to the city, chasing a life with no dirt under his fingernails. That left Thomas alone, holding onto land that felt more like a burden than a blessing. The community respected him, but they also pitted him. They whispered at the feed store that it was only a matter of time before the bank took everything. Thomas heard them. He just chose not to answer. He had grown used to carrying his battles in silence. To the world, he was the stubborn old farmer still clinging to his land. But inside, Thomas knew he was standing on the edge of losing not just his farm, but the last piece of himself. So when that stranger appeared in the storm, Thomas didn't just see a man in need. He saw a reflection of his own weary fight. And though he didn't know it yet, opening that barn door wasn't just an act of kindness. It was the start of something that would test the very core of who he was. Because sometimes, the ones with the least left to give end up giving the most. The storm rattled the barn doors, but inside, Thomas stood frozen, water dripping from his hat brim. The stranger was still on his knees in the mud, shoulders shaking from the cold, his breath ragged in the night air. Thomas's first instinct was caution. A man alone, dressed in a suit, stumbling through farmland? Nothing about it made sense. He could be a thief, a drifter, or worse. But then the stranger coughed again, clutching his side like even standing upright was too much. His words came out broken, but honest. "I don't want anything. Just shelter till the morning. Please." Thomas's eyes narrowed. He thought of the bank letters stacked on his kitchen table, the whispers at the feed store, his own pride that had kept him alive this long. Letting a stranger into his barn was risky, but turning him away, in this storm, that was a kind of cruelty Thomas couldn't stomach. With a heavy sigh, he swung the barn door wide open. "Get in here before you drown," Thomas muttered. "I can't promise much, but I can give you dry hay and a roof." The stranger's eyes widened in disbelief. He stumbled forward, collapsing against the barn wall, water pooling around his shoes. Thomas tossed him an old blanket from a shelf, shaking his head. You'll catch your death out there. Rest here tonight. We'll figure out the rest in the morning." The man whispered, "Thank you. You don't know what this means." Thomas turned away, pulling his coat tighter, trying to convince himself this was just another chore, like fixing a fence or tending a field. But deep down, he felt it. He had just invited something into his life that would not leave quietly. And as he doused the lantern for the night, the stranger's last whispered words drifted across the darkened barn. Words Thomas wasn't meant to hear. "If only he knew who I really was." The barn smelled of hay and rain-soaked earth, the lantern casting long shadows across the wooden beams. Thomas leaned against a stall door, arms crossed, watching the stranger try to settle into the straw. Something about the man didn't add up. The ruined suit, the polished shoes now caked in mud, the way his hands looked too soft for labor. Still, exhaustion won over suspicion. The stranger lay back against the hay, clutching the blanket Thomas had thrown him. "Name's Thomas," the farmer said finally, his voice rough but steady. "This is my land. Don't mistake my kindness for foolishness. You're gone at first light." The man nodded weakly. "Understood. My name is Richard." His voice trailed off, as if even saying it cost him something. In the middle of the night, Thomas awoke to the sound of movement. He grabbed his lantern and stormed into the barn, half expecting to find his tools missing. But instead, he saw Richard, on his knees, coughing violently, clutching his chest. Beside him lay a leather wallet that had fallen from his coat pocket. The edge of something shiny peeked out. Not money, not cards, but a folded property deed with a corporate seal. Thomas froze. What kind of drifter carried legal documents worth a fortune? Before he could ask, Richard's voice rasped out, "Please, don't send me away. I just need time." His eyes carried a weight Thomas hadn't seen in years. Reluctantly, Thomas steadied him and pulled the blanket tighter. But in his mind, the questions multiplied. Who exactly was this man? By dawn, the storm had passed. Thomas was outside, feeding the hens, when a truck rolled down the dirt road and stopped at his gate. Two men in suits stepped out, scanning the land like hunters. "Morning," Thomas called cautiously. They ignored him, exchanging whispers before one asked sharply, "Have you seen a man out this way?" Tall, mid-40s, wearing a torn gray suit. Thomas's stomach tightened. In that moment, he had a choice. Tell the truth and hand Richard over, or lie and protect a man he barely knew. His hand gripped the feed bucket tighter, heart pounding. He opened his mouth to answer. But before he could speak, a voice came from behind him, calm and deliberate. "I'll handle this, Thomas." Thomas froze, the feed bucket heavy in his grip. Richard stepped out of the barn, his wet suit now brushed clean, his presence somehow steadier despite the night of coughing. His eyes locked on the two men at the gate. "You don't need to bother this farmer," Richard said calmly. "I'm the one you're looking for." The men straightened instantly, their tones shifting from interrogators to subordinates. "Mr. Hale," one said with a respectful nod, "we've been searching all night. The board is waiting. Your absence has caused quite a stir." Thomas blinked. "Mr. Hale?" The realization crashed into him like a hammer. Richard wasn't just some lost stranger. He was Richard Hale, a powerful land tycoon, the man whose name had been whispered in every county meeting, whose purchases of failing farms were legendary. The very same man Thomas had cursed under his breath when neighbors lost their land to corporations. Richard dismissed the men with a raised hand, his voice sharp. "Leave us. I'll return on my own terms." Reluctantly, they retreated to their truck and drove off, leaving only the sound of gravel crunching beneath their tires. Thomas's chest tightened with anger. "So this is who you are. The tycoon who swallows up land like a vulture. And I let you into my barn." Richard's gaze didn't waver. For the first time, his polished mask slipped. "Thomas, you don't understand. Yes, I own land. More than most men could dream of. But all of it, it means nothing. I walked away from the boardroom last night because I was suffocating. I've built empires, yet I've lost every piece of myself along the way. And when the storm hit, I found myself here, with you. A man still fighting for what I threw away years ago." His voice cracked, raw with something deeper than wealth. "You see debt and despair when you look at your fields. I see resilience. You still love this land enough to stand on it. That's why I didn't want to reveal who I was. Because for one night, I wanted to be seen as a man, not a tycoon." Thomas stood silent, his heart a storm of anger and pity. This wasn't the ruthless mogul he had pictured. This was a man broken in ways that mirrored his own. Richard stepped closer. "I came here empty-handed, but I don't intend to leave the same way. You gave me shelter when I was nothing but a stranger. And Thomas, I owe you more than you can imagine." And in the next moment, he would prove exactly what those words meant. The rain had eased, leaving the fields glistening under the pale morning sun. Thomas stood with his arms folded, still skeptical, his boots sinking into the wet soil. Richard stood across from him, the once ruined suit now straightened, his bearing no longer that of a lost wanderer, but of a man used to commanding rooms full of power. But his voice was softer now. "You think men like me only take," Richard said, his gaze scanning the land. "But last night, you gave me something no deal, no contract, no empire could. Humanity. A reminder that even the strongest need shelter sometimes." Thomas frowned. "I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because no one deserves to be left out in a storm." Richard nodded slowly. "Exactly. And that's why I won't leave you in yours." He reached into his coat and unfolded the deed Thomas had glimpsed the night before. The name printed on it was one Thomas recognized, his neighbor's farm, foreclosed just months earlier. "I've been buying up land for years," Richard admitted. "But not to strip it. Not anymore. I want to preserve it, give it back to the people who can love it as fiercely as you do. And I'm starting here, with you." Thomas's heart stuttered as Richard handed him a second envelope, thick with papers. Inside were documents, not foreclosure notices, but clear titles. His farm, his land, his legacy, released from debt. "For as long as you want it," Richard said firmly, "this land is yours. No bank can take it. No storm can wash it away. Consider it my repayment for the kindness you showed a stranger." Thomas's vision blurred. His whole life, he had fought alone, believing no one would ever stand with him. Yet here was a man he had once cursed, now placing freedom in his hands. He swallowed hard, his voice breaking. "Why me?" Richard's reply was simple. "Because you reminded me that land isn't just property. It's memory. It's family. And you still believe in it." The two men stood in silence, the field stretching wide around them, the morning sun breaking through the clouds. A farmer who had nearly lost everything, and a tycoon who had nearly forgotten what mattered, bound together by one night and one choice. And as Thomas looked at his fields, for the first time in years, he didn't see burden. He saw hope, because sometimes the smallest act of shelter can change the course of two lives forever. If a farmer's simple act of shelter could save not just a stranger, but his own future, imagine what the next story could awaken in you. Don't let this journey end here. Watch our playlist and let the next twist move you even deeper. And if this touched your heart, subscribe now and join our SoulTwist family, because the very next story might just change yours.